Hi, everyone. I wanted to go over the instructions for how to complete your classroom plan. So I am going to share my screen with everyone. There are two places in our Canvas site where you can find the instructions for completing the classroom plan. That includes a rubric as well. So I will be using the rubric to grade the classroom plan. The two different places that you can go, if you go to modules, you can, of course, go to the syllabus page, which includes all the information about our course and descriptions of all the assignments and grading policies. But then also I've included a shortcut here where you, on the calendar page, where you can go directly to the calendar, and then after the calendar, which is how I'm going to get to it here, after the calendar, you will note that you have a list of all of the different assignments for our semester. So for our classroom plan, keep in mind, I realize that not everybody plans to be a classroom teacher. However, in terms of developing a classroom plan, I want you to put on the hat of being either a classroom teacher or being someone, if you're going to plan to be a service provider. And when I say service provider, I mean occupational therapist, physical therapist, speech language therapist, maybe art therapist. We do have art therapy out there, music therapy, school counseling and social work. You will have opportunities where you will be working with small groups within a specific kind of service type setting, counseling type setting. And so with that, anytime we're working with groups of children, we want to make sure that we are practicing positive reinforcement in order for them to contribute to whatever lessons that you might be having them engage in. And so while this is focused on specifically K-12 classroom management and classroom plans, be aware that I do want you to tweak it to what your future role as an educator or a service provider or an individual working with children, whatever that future role plans to be. If you need some support in thinking how to tweak, then please reach out and let me know. And I am more than happy to text back and forth or set up a time to chat via phone or do a video conference or meet face-to-face. So I love meeting with online students. So your classroom plan, it's worth 35 points. In order to prepare you to develop this plan, you'll need to complete 2 modules within the IRIS Center. So the IRIS Center is one of our amazing resources that we have within special education that is brought to us by funding through Part D of IDEA. So if you all recall from learning about our critical legislation, there are 4 parts to IDEA, and that 4th part, Part D, is all on educator preparation. It's all on providing research funding, as well as providing training for in-service and pre-service educators. So you will have to complete those 2 modules, as well as read the article that comes from our PBIS Center another space where IDEA is providing some funding because we have a PBIS Technical Assistance Center. So keep that in mind. PBIS is rooted out of special education research. So when you see PBIS in your schools, you know where a lot of that is coming from. And a lot of those initiatives have been created and allowed to happen because of the funding from IDEA. So this is why that piece of legislation is so important. We spent so much time talking about it. So make sure that you complete that prerequisite work and before you dive into creating your plan. Please note that in the modules, you might learn about them using a type of clip system. So these modules were created before a lot of the research came out about how we do not want to use those clip systems within our classrooms. So when you're thinking of ways in positive behavior intervention supports and strategies, reinforcers, thinking of different ideas for helping to motivate your students, please make sure that you do not include any kind of clip system. If you're observing that in a classroom, then I encourage you to think about and observe how it may not be supporting all learners in interacting with in a learning situation in the best way, and how it can adversely affect some of our children. So we want to make sure that our plan is grounded in research. So outside of these resources, please feel free to investigate other resources. I encourage you to use our textbook. It's always a wonderful resource, and the textbook does a wonderful job too of providing more information for a deeper study. So you can look at all of the references within the textbook that they highlight to go to different places. You can see within the rubric, I encourage you to use the rubric as a guide to help you create your plan. In terms of that product that you're going to be submitting, it's up to you how you want to create that product. So if you want it to be in a simple Word document, you can do that. If you want it to be presented in a Prezi, you can do that. If you want it to be presented in, maybe you want to use Satori. I've had students pull up Satori because they really enjoyed using it at the beginning of the year and decided to create their classroom management plan in Satori. If you want to use PowerPoint, you can do that. You decide. Canva is another a fun platform. So you decide kind of that mechanism that you want to develop this plan in. Canva can be a fun one because you can also support creating fun documents and posters in your classroom too, that might include some of the classroom procedures that you will be including. So the first piece, just like in our course here, right? And we always do this at the beginning of a school year, just like we did in our course, is building community. So think about different activities that you could engage in with your students at the beginning of the year, as well as throughout the year. You remember, building community is something that we never stop doing. So we don't just do it at the beginning of the year, but we need to engage in community building throughout the year. So I encourage you all to go back to those Padlets that we did at the beginning of the semester and investigate some of the different activities that your peers included, as well as looking at some of the activities that you included. We did several several different activities within our first couple weeks on building community. And so I encourage you to revisit that work. So this is not new research that you should have to do for the building community piece, but you're maybe revisiting some of the work that we've already done in the class to include that within your classroom plan. So that's the first aspect. I'm not going to read these points within the rubric. You all can do that, but just be attuned to where you want to be within the rubric. Hopefully everybody wants to be at a proficient or accomplished level. The more detail that you provide, the more in line you will be with accomplished, because that will allow me to be able to fully understand your plans within your classroom plan. The next piece is room arrangement. So you do have to, I do want to highlight this, include a drawing to receive accomplished. So please make sure it can be done on a computer or it can be done by hand. I do not mind it being done by hand. You can put X's for desks. I'm not an artist. My brother is the artist in our family. And so please know that I'm not expecting perfect and beautiful drawings here. I am just wanting to see how you plan to lay out your classroom to support your students, making sure that it is going to be an accessible one. So think about accessibility when we're thinking about designing your classroom. Also think about distractibility. So if we have too much on the walls in a classroom, that can be very overwhelming and distracting for our students that might be highly sensitive, or our students that might have ADHD or some other exceptionalities where visual stimuli can be overwhelming, overstimulating to them. So please be mindful of that and think about that. Think twice before you put something on the wall. You want the attention in your classroom to be on you, the peers, and the learning and the work. And so anything that we put on the walls needs to support that. Think about your classroom rules. So often now we refer to our classroom rules as our class norms, and it is perfectly fine if you decide that you want to engage your students in helping to create these. And so you can explain that and discuss how you plan to do that, but also think about in your head, because whenever we're engaging students in creating class norms or class rules, we need to have an idea in our head of what we want them to look like, because we need to think about the type of culture we want to have our students be working in. And so keep that in mind when you're using that philosophy. I highly encourage you all to do that. I do that in my face-to-face classes, and it really helps to support creating a warm and nurturing environment that allows everybody to feel safe with learning. Keep in mind, learning is full of risk-taking, especially for our students with disabilities. And so we really need to make sure that we foster those safe environments so our students can take the risks necessary to learn. Classroom procedures. This is one that sometimes stumps people, just simply because we don't always think about that we might have a lot of procedures in our classroom. While we don't want to have too many procedures, we don't want to have too little either. So there's a sweet spot. Having classroom procedures in place can help reduce students wondering what to do. It can help reduce them asking you questions all the time. So it puts the responsibility more on the students when they know what the procedures are. Anytime you're creating procedures, you want them to be in short bulleted lists. Okay, keep in mind your learners. So if you have learners that have not learned how to read yet, then you want to make sure that you are using words that they know, so they are able to identify by sight, or you are using pictures so that they are able to understand from the picture what the procedures are. You want your procedures to be in 3 to 5 steps. You don't want too many steps for the procedures. Procedures are wonderful things to have hung on the wall, making sure that you're putting them in appropriate places. So some examples of procedures: what's the procedure for when your students come into the room? If your students don't know what they're supposed to do when they come into your classroom, guess what? They're going to engage in what I call creative behaviors, because they're going to fill that time until you are ready to start class. They're going to fill that time with something. And sometimes those creative behaviors are not necessarily the behaviors that we always want to see in a classroom. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not. So having a procedure for what should students do when they enter the classroom is a wonderful one to include. What are your procedures if you assign homework? What are your procedures for submitting that homework? You want it to be consistent. So that's another piece with procedures. You want, this is something that you are going to follow every time they submit homework, every time they come into the classroom, unless there's an assembly or something different. And then you can warn them ahead of time. Make sure you warn them ahead of time. Some children do not like to be surprised with any kind of change. Another procedure is using the restroom. So what are your procedures? You want to make sure that you respect students that need to use the restroom during class. So what are those procedures? What's the policy? So another word to think of your procedures is a policy. With your procedures, I want to note and highlight here, you do want to make sure that you are teaching these at the beginning of the school year. So you can't just put up your procedures and assume that students are going to know what to do. You need to teach them. So use those high leverage practices in special ed and use direct explicit instruction to teach the procedures. Use modeling to teach those procedures. So you do the whole lesson plan of I do, we do, and you do with practicing these procedures. And those are just a couple examples. If you are in an elementary classroom, you might have more procedures than someone that's in a secondary classroom, partly because your students are in there all day long. Another versus just in there for a 60, 90-minute block, however long your class is. Some procedures you might want to include is transitioning. How do they transition from, let's say, English language arts to whatever the next activity is? Maybe it's math. So really think about what procedures. I encourage you to observe, if you're in classrooms right now, observe your cooperating teachers, see what kind of procedures they hopefully have in place. The next one is procedures for encouraging and reinforcing students. So what are you going to do to get your students motivated? So how are you going to get your students motivated to learn? We, of course, want to use a high level of praise, but what else might you use? I want you to think about the difference when you're thinking about encouraging and reinforcing your students. Think about the idea of equality and equity in your classrooms. Think about our high leverage practices too. Sometimes our students might choose to engage in our creative behaviors because the work is too hard, because the work is is too easy. So keep that in mind with how are you going to encourage your students to engage in the work that you're asking them to do. I also want you to be mindful when you're thinking about reinforcers, be mindful of what the system's policies are. So I know some systems do not allow rewards that might be edible. So no candy in some systems. And you know, that's always one to really think about. So what are some tangible rewards maybe that would not be costly, and then because we can spend a lot of money on treasure boxes, and then also some that that would not be edible. I would encourage you too to think about how this could be tied to a PBIS plan, a positive behavior intervention support plan that your school might have as well. Family participation, we always want to make sure that we are including our families within our classroom community. And so I want you to really mindfully think about how you are going to support the families of your students to knowing what they, how you will bring them into the classroom and have them feel that they are part of that community. So you can see the word describe is all throughout, even at the end. I'm just saying, just describe. Please describe, what do you plan to do? And then lastly, there are points for making sure that you're being clear and concise, and you have an organized plan with written directions. I would encourage you to take this rubric and use these main points as headings within your rubric, because that helps with clarity and organization. I would also encourage you to do some peer reviewing to help with catching any type of editorial errors. It is always challenging to catch these within our own work. And I think that's all I have to say about all of these pieces. When thinking about family participation, also think about communication. You know, the frequency of communicating, how you're going to be communicating with families, when you're going to be communicating with families. We want to be mindful that we're not only communicating with families or always communicating with families when we have a problem. And we also want to be mindful that when we're communicating with families, we're talking about academics and then also non-academic areas as well. So we want and make sure that we are doing that for all children, even our students that that struggle with learning. We want to make sure that we do find something positive about what they are learning in providing those pieces, and not just always talking about what a nice and sweet child that they are, but that also they're working hard and mastering this and working on reviewing this because they haven't gotten this skill yet. Right? So make sure that you're really using a lot of that growth mindset work here, specifically when we're engaging with families and working with our students. If you have further questions, so there, obviously you have this video to look at, and you have now the rubric here. You can also go to the video I did at the beginning of the semester, where I did a review of all the assignments, and including this assignment. I think I've included all of the same information, but it's always good to hear it more than once. If you have further questions, please reach out, and you can send me a group me. I typically have as a mama, I typically have my phone very close by. So please send a group me, and you can send it privately or through our group me combined thread, or you can send an email. All right. Good luck and have fun. This should be a fun assignment because it's one that you are really going to be able to use when you leave the program that you are in. All right. Thank you. Bye.